100 bikers waited silently beyond the locked wedding gate. "Your father owed us nothing," Gravel told Claire. Then the venue manager uncovered a guest list changed without the bride's approval. With minutes remaining, Claire turned to her fiancé and asked, "Did you know they were erased?" "If that gate opens, the ceremony stops." A server stopped so abruptly that a champagne flute slid from her tray and shattered across the marble floor as a low wall of motorcycle engines rolled over the lake. Claire Whitaker turned from the mirror at 4:20 p.m., one pearl earring still unclasped, while her makeup artist froze with a brush suspended beside her cheek. 40 minutes remained before the wedding. The engine noise grew heavier, then cut off all at once. Claire crossed the preparation room in 3 quick steps, gathering the front of her white dress above the broken glass. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see a line of headlights curving along the narrow lakeside road, each beam trembling through the fog. The sharp scent of white roses mixed with spilled champagne and the bitter coffee someone had abandoned near the door. Then the steel barrier at Northmere Lake Pavilion dropped across the entrance. "Who are they?" Claire asked. The manager pressed a radio to his mouth, listening with one hand over his other ear. "Approximately 100 riders," he said. "They claim they were invited, but none of their names appear on today's access list." Marianne Mercer stepped into the room before Claire could answer, her cream jacket dry, her posture composed, and a silver folder tucked beneath one arm. She did not look toward the gate. She looked directly at Claire. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent." Claire felt the words tighten around her ribs. Marianne moved closer, speaking quietly enough that the staff pretended not to hear. "You can have a dignified wedding, or you can turn this place into a roadside gathering for men your guests have never met." Daniel stood behind his mother near the doorway, already dressed, his tie slightly crooked and his face pale. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Claire looked at him for 2 full seconds. "Daniel?" He lowered his eyes. Outside, the riders had dismounted. They were white men, mostly middle-aged or older, broad-shouldered beneath dark leather jackets, their boots marked with mud from the wet road. Several had gray beards. One tall man near the front had a scar running from his temple to his cheek and held something folded beneath his coat. No one approached the barrier. No one shouted. They simply stood in the rain. The silence felt louder than the engines. The venue manager cleared his throat and showed Claire a tablet. "The current list contains 212 approved guests. These riders are not among them. If they cross the gate without authorization, the access clause allows us to suspend the event." Claire stared at the names scrolling beneath his thumb. Her father had handled the original guest file before he died 11 days earlier. Gordon Whitaker had been methodical about numbers, signatures, and confirmations. He had checked the seating plan twice and complained when one table held 9 people instead of 8. He would not have invited 100 strangers by accident. "Show me the change history," Claire said. Marianne's fingers tightened around the silver folder. "Claire, this is not the moment." "Then tell me why you already knew they were coming." Rain tapped harder against the glass. Daniel shifted his weight, but still did not speak. Claire's phone vibrated on the dressing table, rattling against a tray of hairpins. One unheard voicemail appeared from an unfamiliar number. She pressed play. A rough, controlled voice filled the room. "Ms. Whitaker, my name is Russell Keene. Your father marked one final stretch of road. We came to finish it before dark." Claire stopped breathing for a beat. Beyond the locked gate, the scarred biker unfolded a weathered map beneath the rain. 11 days earlier, at 6:47 on a gray Monday morning, Claire had found 3 missed calls from the county hospital and 1 message from Daniel asking her not to drive alone. By 7:30, Gordon Whitaker's brown work jacket was folded across an empty chair beside a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Claire remembered the smell more than the words. Burnt coffee, disinfectant, wet wool. Gordon had collapsed before sunrise. There had been no final speech, no carefully prepared farewell, only a sealed hospital belongings envelope containing his watch and wallet. Claire had stared at the envelope for nearly a minute before Daniel gently took it from her and carried it to the car. The wedding was scheduled for November 29th. Gordon had died on November 18th. Claire asked to postpone it that afternoon. Marianne objected before Daniel could answer, immediately turning the decision into a calculation of penalties, reservations, and contracts. She did not raise her voice. She placed a leather planner on Claire's kitchen counter, opened it to a page marked with 6 colored tabs, and explained that 312 meals had been confirmed, 48 rooms had been reserved, and the pavilion's cancellation penalty would exceed $36,000. Then she softened her tone. Your father wanted you to have this day. Claire had her concern. Later, she would recognize control. During the next week, Marian moved through the wedding like a quiet administrator cleaning a damaged file. She shortened the memorial reading from 4 minutes to 40 seconds. She replaced Gordon's favorite cedar and orange candle with unscented white pillars because the fragrance was too rustic. She moved his framed photograph from the entrance table to a side corridor beside the coat check, where the glass reflected emergency exit signs instead of guests. Each change was presented as kindness. Each one made him smaller. Claire noticed, objected once, then stopped. Grief had turned every decision into weight. The tasting menu felt like paper in her mouth. The champagne was too sweet. Even the butter carried the faint metallic taste of the silverware. Daniel stayed beside her, but he answered difficult questions with delays. Let's get through the week. We can fix it later. My mother is only trying to help. At 9:15 on the night before the wedding, Claire opened the seating chart and found an entire section missing. Table numbers 25 through 36 had vanished. Exactly 100 names had been removed, and the room layout had been compressed to conceal the missing section. Most of the names meant nothing to her. Keene, Harlan, Pike, Dorsey, Bell, Maddox. Some included road nicknames in quotation marks. None belonged to her family. Claire called Daniel. He answered on the 5th ring. Were these Dad's guests? Silence followed. 3 seconds, then 4. They were people he knew through work, Daniel said. My mother thought their attendance might complicate things. Claire stood in her apartment with Gordon's hospital belongings envelope on the table and rain ticking against the window. Did you agree to remove them? Daniel said Marianne had handled the access list. He said the venue had strict standards. He said Claire had already suffered enough. He never said no. By 10:02, Marianne arrived with a printed guest list inside the same silver folder she carried everywhere. She explained that Gordon had maintained informal roadside associations and that some of those people might arrive wearing clothing unsuitable for Northmere Lake Pavilion. Claire asked whether her father had invited them personally. Marianne closed the folder. That is not the question that matters now. It was the only question Claire wanted answered. The following morning, staff removed Gordon's chair from the front row because Marianne said an empty seat would distract from the ceremony. A white floral arrangement took its place. 40 minutes before the wedding, Claire looked through the rain-streaked glass and finally understood what had been done. The missing names had not disappeared. They were standing outside the locked gate. Claire stepped through the pavilion doors at 4:27 p.m., lifting her dress above the wet stone as wind drove cold rain beneath the glass canopy. Behind her, the lobby glowed with chandeliers, white roses polished silver, and rows of champagne flutes aligned with mathematical precision. Ahead, beyond the steel barrier, 100 motorcycles stood dark and dripping beneath the fog. The riders looked as if they had been cut from the road itself. Leather jackets carried rain, dust, faded stitching, and years of weather. Mud clung to heavy boots. Gray beards, scarred hands, and lined faces formed a silent wall against the pale stone and spotless windows of Northmere Lake Pavilion. No one called out. No one moved toward her. The man with the scarf folded the wax cloth beneath his arm and removed his gloves. Claire Whitaker. His voice matched the message. Russell Keene. Most people call me Gravel. Claire stopped 6 feet from the barrier. Cold water ran from the edge of the canopy and struck the pavement between them in a steady silver line. Why are you here? Gravel looked past her only once, toward the white ballroom where staff in pressed uniforms watched through the glass. Because your father asked us to be. Marianne had followed Claire outside, but remained beneath the warm lights, her cream jacket untouched by rain. Daniel stood beside her, close enough to hear and too far away to help. Inside, the air smelled of vanilla candles and warm bread. Outside, Claire tasted rain and engine oil on the wind. A catering assistant hurried along the service path with a loaded cart, one wheel catching in a drainage groove. The cart tilted. A silver tray slid. The cart tipped toward the open side of the barrier, and gravel and two riders reached through the railing to steady it before the trays struck the pavement. They did it without crossing the barrier. One of them checked the twisted wheel. Another returned a fallen napkin box. Then all three stepped back into the rain. The woman thanked them twice. Gravel only nodded. Claire watched water darken his shirt where the jacket had been removed. Men who had supposedly come to disrupt her wedding were protecting food they would never be allowed to eat. "My father owed you something," she said. Gravel's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with disappointment she could not yet place. "Gordon owed us nothing." He unfolded the cloth across the top rail of the barrier. It was not a ceremonial banner or a club flag. It was a road map, hand-marked with red circles, blue lines, yellow dates, and small block letters written in Gordon's unmistakable script. The edges were softened by years of folding. Rain gathered on the wax surface without soaking through. Claire recognized Route 18, the northern bridge, and the long bend beside Alder Ridge where her father had once refused to let her drive during winter. "What is this?" she asked. Gravel turned the map over. The reverse side held columns of initials, dates, route numbers, and short notes written in different inks. Some entries were 20 years old. Others had been added only months earlier. "Every mark on the front is a place your father made safer," Gravel said. "Every name on the back belongs to someone who came home because he listened." Claire traced one faded line without touching it. Keene, mile 47, guardrail replacement. Beneath it were dozens more. Harlan, Pike, Dorsey, Bell, Maddox, the same names that had vanished from the seating chart. Marion stepped closer to the doors. "Claire, this proves nothing about their right to enter." Gravel did not look at her. He kept his attention on Claire. "If you ask us to leave, we leave. Your father never took choices away from people. We will not do it either." Claire looked along the line of riders. 100 men waited in the rain without demanding a thing. Then she asked the question that had been waiting behind every missing name. "What did my father do for all of you?" Gravel placed one scarred hand on the map. "He made sure we lived long enough to stand here." Gravel tapped the first red circle on the map, then the next, then a third farther north where the ink had faded almost brown. Route 18, winter of 2008. Broken drainage channel. Black ice collected before sunrise. A broad man named Harlan stepped forward, rain streaming from his gray beard onto a leather vest patched by years of road dust. "3 riders reported it," he said. "The county ignored us until Gordon filed the measurements under his own name and attached photographs from 6 separate mornings." He pointed to a blue mark near the bridge. "They rebuilt the channel 12 days later. No one called Gordon a hero." The riders spoke in dates, mile markers, inspection numbers, and repairs. Pike described a loose steel plate on the northern bridge that caught narrow tires during rain. Bell remembered a warning sign turned nearly 40 degrees away from oncoming traffic. Maddox recalled an unlit construction barrier hidden beyond a curve where fog settled low after dusk. Each account ended the same way. Gordon listened, documented, returned, and refused to close the report until the danger was corrected. Behind Claire, servers crossed the brilliant lobby carrying trays of pale pastries arranged in perfect circles. Crystal lights reflected across the white floor without a single shadow. Outside, the bikers stood under a darkening sky, their soaked leather creaking when they shifted, their stories marked by oil, rust, rain, and roads the wedding guests would never notice. The ballroom smelled of warm sugar and polished wood. The air beside the gate smelled of wet asphalt. Claire looked down at Gordon's handwriting. She knew the shape of every letter. His capital R leaned slightly forward. His numbers were narrow and exact. Beside one yellow line he had written shoulder drop for 0.7 inches no warning. Follow until corrected. He never told me, Claire said. Gravel folded his gloves beneath one arm. He did not think listening to people was something worth announcing. An older rider, near the back, removed his helmet. A pale scar crossed his forehead beneath thinning white hair. I reported a missing guardrail for 4 months, he said. Your father drove out in freezing rain, stood there with a measuring wheel, and reopened the case after someone marked it complete. Another rider raised 2 fingers. He made the county test fresh pavement after 6 of us said it was slick. A third added, he corrected an evacuation route that sent motorcycles toward a closed tunnel. One by one, the march became people. Claire turned the map over again. The 100 names no longer looked like a secret list. They looked like a record of lives, continuing. At 4:34 p.m., the venue manager stepped beneath the canopy and reminded her that 26 minutes remained before the scheduled processional. His black suit was spotless. Water ran from Gravel's sleeves and gathered beneath his boots. Mr. Keene, the manager said, did Gordon Whitaker formally invite this group? Gravel reached inside his jacket and removed a clear waterproof sleeve. Inside was a printed page bearing Gordon's signature, the pavilion logo, and a date from 4 months earlier. He invited 100 of us, Gravel said. He asked us to park outside, shut down at the gate, and enter on foot so we would not disturb anyone. Mary Ann's voice came sharp from the doorway. That arrangement was made before circumstances changed. Gravel did not turn toward her. Gordon's absence is the circumstance. Claire felt the words settle more heavily than the rain. Gravel explained that Gordon had planned to meet them at the entrance, introduce them quietly, and seat them in the rear section. After his death, the riders had considered staying away. Then Gravel received an automated cancellation notice showing that both the motorcycle group and Gordon's escort notation had been removed from the event file. We did not come to replace him, Gravel said. No one can. He looked along the narrow path, leading from the gate to the glass hall. We came because he once told us this would be the only road he was afraid he might not finish. Claire looked toward Daniel. He stood inside the spotless lobby beside his mother, framed by white flowers and gold light, while the men her father had invited waited outside in cold rain. She lifted the waterproof invitation. Daniel, she said, how long have you known they were supposed to be here? Daniel's face changed before he answered. His eyes moved from Claire to the waterproof invitation, then toward Mary Ann, as if the truth might become smaller if he divided his attention between them. I knew your father had invited some riders, he said. Claire held the map against her dress. Rainwater from the wax cloth darkened the white fabric near her wrist. Some. Daniel swallowed. I saw the original list after Gordon sent it. I knew there were close to 100 names. The chandeliers behind him cast warm gold over his shoulders. Beyond the barrier, cold rain ran down black leather and pooled around muddy boots. Claire stood between those two worlds, dressed for one and beginning to understand the other. And when they disappeared, she asked. Daniel looked at the marble floor. My mother said the venue had raised concerns. Marian stepped forward at once. The venue did raise concerns. The manager's expression tightened, but he said nothing. Mary Ann continued, explaining that the pavilion served private clients, that unexpected group arrivals required approval, and that the ceremony could not absorb 100 additional people without compromising security. Her voice remained smooth. Her cream jacket remained flawless. Behind her, staff replaced the shattered champagne flute and wiped the last wet marks from the marble until the floor looked untouched again. Outside, nothing could be erased so easily. Gravel's jacket hung open after he had used it to protect the catering trays. The older riders stood with rain on their faces and road mud at their feet. Gordon's marks remained on the map. Were they additional? Claire asked. The manager glanced at his tablet. The original floor plan included 12 rear tables that are not present in the current layout. Mary Ann's mouth hardened. Claire turned to Daniel. So their seats existed? Yes, he said. Their meals were confirmed? Yes. And you let me believe they were strangers arriving without permission? Daniel took one step toward her. I thought you were overwhelmed. Your father had just died, and my mother said handling it quietly would protect you. Claire gave a small, empty laugh. It held no humor. You protected me from knowing what was being done in my name. The rain struck harder against the glass canopy. At 4:39 p.m., a coordinator appeared in the lobby holding a headset and announced that guests were beginning to leave the pre-ceremony lounge to find out why the processional had not started. The string quartet had reached the end of its second waiting set. Dinner service would be delayed if the processional did not begin within 21 minutes. Every number sounded like pressure. Marianne used them immediately. "We can discuss this afterward," she said. Right now, Claire needs to decide whether she wants a wedding or a public dispute. Gravel folded the map once, carefully matching its worn edges. There does not need to be a dispute. Marianne finally looked directly at him. "Then take your group and leave." Gravel's face remained still. "That is Claire's decision." 100 riders said nothing. Their silence forced every word beneath the canopy to stand on its own. Marianne crossed her arms. "I paid for this venue." "You paid invoices," Claire said. "That is not the same as owning my choices." Daniel's head lifted. Marianne stared at her as though the sentence had come from someone else. The manager touched his earpiece, listened, then spoke with visible caution. "We need a final decision within 10 minutes. Hidden together." "You erased 100 people," she said. "Now you want credit for returning one." Marianne's composure thinned. "I'm trying to save your wedding." Claire looked through the glass at the ballroom, where Gordon's photograph had been placed near the coat check and his front row chair had been replaced by white flowers. Then she looked at Gravel, waiting beyond the gate without crossing it. "No," Claire said quietly. "You're trying to save the version you designed." She turned back to Daniel. "Did you know your mother removed my father's chair, too?" Daniel did not answer quickly enough. Claire's fingers closed around the map. Less than 20 minutes remained. For the first time that day, she stopped asking what would keep the ceremony intact and began asking whether anything built on that silence deserved to continue. Claire walked back into the pavilion at 4:42 p.m., carrying Gordon's map while rainwater darkened the hem of her dress. The lobby received her like a polished machine. Staff moved silently across white marble, straightened ivory chairs, replaced damp floor mats, and adjusted candles so every flame stood at the same height. Beyond the glass, 100 riders remained under the cold gray sky, their shoulders wet, their motorcycles fading into the fog. Inside, everything had been arranged to suggest control. Outside, nothing pretended the weather could be controlled. Claire passed the coat check and stopped. Gordon's framed photograph stood on a narrow table beside numbered claim tickets and 3 abandoned umbrellas. The picture showed him wearing his brown inspection jacket, one hand resting on a roadside barrier, his expression serious because he had never learned how to smile naturally for cameras. A white orchid had been placed beside the frame. The white orchid carried almost no scent. "Where is his chair?" Claire asked. The ceremony coordinator glanced toward Marianne before answering. "The front row memorial seat was removed this morning." "At whose request?" The coordinator held her clipboard tighter. Mrs. Mercer said an empty chair might be upsetting. Marianne entered behind Claire. Her heels made clean, precise sounds against the marble. "I was trying to spare you a painful reminder." Claire touched the edge of Gordon's photograph. "You moved his picture out of the ballroom. Guests were becoming emotional. You removed his chair. It would have drawn attention. You deleted the people he invited." Marianne's expression remained composed, but the muscles beside her mouth tightened. "I removed a complication you were not equipped to manage." Daniel came through the glass doors, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of wet leather into the warm lobby. For the first time, the two worlds touched. Several guests standing near the ballroom entrance turned to look. Claire faced him. "If letting them in costs us this venue, will you stand beside me?" Daniel's eyes moved toward the chandeliers, the musicians waiting with their instruments, the floral arch built from 700 white roses, and the staff watching the clock. Then he looked at Gordon's photograph near the coat check. "Yes," he said, but the word came too late to sound certain. Claire waited. Daniel drew a breath. "Yes," he repeated, "even if the ceremony stops." Marianne stepped between them. "There is no reason to destroy a $36,000 agreement over a symbolic gesture." Claire unfolded the map across the coat check counter. Its weathered brown surface looked almost severe beneath the white orchids and silver claim numbers. "They are not symbolic," she said. "They are guests my father invited." The venue manager approached with his tablet. "We have 18 minutes before the scheduled processional. After that, dinner service and transportation schedules will be affected." Marianne opened her silver folder and removed a printed proposal. Gravel could enter alone. The other 99 riders would leave the property. One seat at an existing rear table would be reserved for Gravel. Gordon's photograph would be returned to the ballroom for the reception. "This is the reasonable solution," she said. Claire looked through the glass. Gravel stood beside the barrier with his helmet under one arm. He was not signaling, pacing, or demanding an answer. The riders behind him remained still, even as the rain soaked through their jackets. They were giving her something Marianne had not offered once all week. Space. Claire folded the proposal and placed it back inside the silver folder. "No," Marianne's voice lowered. "Think carefully. I am. You could lose the ceremony. Then I lose it honestly." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he turned to the manager. "Bring us the full contract." Marianne stared at her son. Daniel, he did not look away. "And the original guest access attachments," Claire added. The manager hesitated. "Those files are archived in the office." "Then retrieve them." Gravel appeared beyond the glass, holding up the waterproof sleeve Gordon had signed. He called through the narrow opening in the door, his voice calm. "You may want the group access appendix too." Marianne's face changed. Only slightly. Claire noticed. At 4:46 p.m., she placed Gordon's map beside the silver folder and said, "Bring the amendment log as well." The manager stepped into the glass-walled office behind reception, unlocked the archived event file, and returned at 4:49 p.m. with a contract binder, system log, and 2 archived attachments. He placed them on a white marble table beneath a chandelier shaped like falling ice. Gordon's weathered road map lay beside them, stained at the folds and marked by 20 years of rain, measurements, and handwritten warnings. One set of papers looked designed to impress. The other had been used to protect lives. Claire stood at the head of the table, while Marianne remained opposite her, one hand resting on the silver folder. Daniel moved to Claire's side. Through the glass wall, the riders formed a dark line against the fog, water running from their jackets while warm candlelight reflected above them like a world they had not been permitted to enter. "The master event agreement names Claire Whitaker as the event holder," the manager said. "Gordon Whitaker is listed as her authorized planning representative." He turned 3 pages. Marian Mercer appears only as the billing contact and contributing payer. Marianne's chin lifted. A contributing payer who covered most of the invoice. "Payment status does not transfer guest control authority," the manager replied. The words were quiet. They landed hard. He opened the first attachment. The original floor plan showed 12 tables at the rear of the ballroom, each seating 8 guests, with 4 additional places assigned along the side aisle. The catering count included all 100 riders. Gordon's signature appeared beneath a typed note requiring the motorcycles to remain beyond the entrance, engines off, with all participants entering on foot. Nothing about the arrangement was informal. Nothing had been unexpected. Claire looked at Marianne. You knew the venue had approved them. Marianne's eyes stayed on the documents. Approval before Gordon died did not account for the emotional effect their presence might have on you. So you decided what I was allowed to feel. I decided what was necessary to keep this event from collapsing. The manager unfolded the amendment log. A pale blue screen printout showed every change made during the previous 11 days. Table removals, revised catering totals, altered escort notes, relocation of Gordon's photograph, deletion of the memorial chair, and cancellation of 100 guest credentials. Each request carried a timestamp and originated from the sponsor portal account assigned to Marianne. The portal allowed her to submit changes but not authorize them, yet a staff member had processed the requests without obtaining Claire's required signature. One line read, "Bride approved removal of motorcycle group." The authorization field beneath it was blank. Claire touched the empty space. "Where's my signature?" No one answered. The quartet inside the ballroom began another piece, soft strings passing through the closed doors while rain struck the glass in uneven waves. Guests gathered at a distance, watching from beneath white floral arches. Outside, the bikers did not move closer. Their restraint made the accusation of disruption look smaller with every passing second. Marianne finally spoke. Daniel confirmed that Claire was not in a condition to manage these details. Claire turned to him. Daniel's face went pale. I never told her Claire approved it, he said. You told me to stay out of it, and I did. That was wrong. Marianne stared at her son. Be careful. Daniel stepped nearer to Claire. I should have spoken 11 days ago. The manager examined the final page and drew one slow breath. Under Section 14, participant removals require written confirmation from the event holder. We do not have that confirmation. Marianne tapped the table, then invoked the safety clause. 100 men in leather waiting outside a private wedding constitutes a reasonable concern. The manager looked through the glass. Every engine was silent. Every motorcycle remained parked in orderly rows beyond the barrier. Gravel stood with his helmet beneath one arm, leaving a clear path for staff and vehicles. They have complied with every condition in the original appendix, the manager said. There is no documented disturbance. Gravel lifted no sign of victory. The riders behind him remained motionless. Claire closed the binder, leaving her hand on its cover. Restore the original guest list. Marianne's voice sharpened. Claire, you do not understand what this will do. My name is on the agreement. Claire looked directly at the manager. Restore the 12 tables, return my father's photograph to the ballroom, replace his chair, and open the gate. The manager pressed his radio button. For 3 seconds, only static filled the lobby. Then the steel barrier began to rise through the rain. 100 bikers waited on the other side. Not one of them stepped forward until Claire turned toward the glass and gave them a single nod. The first rider crossed the gate at 4:53 p.m., leaving his silent motorcycle beyond the barrier, removing his helmet, and wiping both boots on the absorbent entry mats the staff had placed outside. Gravel followed, then Harlan, Pike, Bell, and the others in pairs. No engine started. No voices rose. The only sounds were rain sliding from leather, boots pressing against wet stone, and the distant quartet continuing beneath the ballroom's crystal lights. 100 men who had been described as a threat entered with more restraint than many of the guests already holding champagne inside. The contrast changed the room. Dark jackets passed beneath white floral arches. Scarred hands held helmets beside polished silver trays. Muddy boots paused at the marble threshold while servers in spotless gloves offered fresh towels and quietly moved the orchids aside to create space. Some guests stared. A few county employees among the guests recognized Gordon's route numbers on the map and stepped forward to shake hands. Gravel stopped beside Claire before entering the ballroom. His hair and beard were wet, and the scar along his cheek looked pale beneath the chandelier light. We can still leave, he said. The gate opening does not obligate you to use us for anything. Claire looked past him at the 100 riders waiting in orderly rows. My father invited you. He did. And he told you about the aisle? Gravel's gaze moved toward the long white carpet leading beneath the glass ceiling. He said he planned to walk you from the doors to Daniel. He also said he had spent his life measuring roads, but could not measure how hard that one would be. Claire pressed her lips together. For 1 second, the chandeliers blurred. Then she handed Gordon's map to the coordinator and asked her to place it beside his photograph. At 4:58 p.m., the missing chair returned to the front row as staff began bringing 12 folded tables from storage, planning to finish resetting the rear section while the ceremony was underway. Over the next half hour, servers laid out the plates, glasses, and silverware while the ceremony continued beyond the partition. Because the kitchen had retained the original non-refundable count of 312 meals, every restored place had a plate waiting after the ceremony. The restored section was less perfectly spaced than the rest of the ballroom. It was also the first part of the room that felt alive. Marianne stood near the entrance with her silver folder closed against her chest. No one confronted her. No one needed to. The paperwork remained on the marble table, the blank authorization line visible beneath the chandelier. Her authority had not been taken by force. It had simply been measured and found smaller than she claimed. The processional began at 5:07 p.m., 7 minutes behind schedule. The quartet changed from its waiting music to Gordon's chosen piece, a slow arrangement Claire had not known he requested. Guests rose. The glass walls held the last gray light from the lake, while candles cast gold across the white aisle. Outside, the parked motorcycles formed dark silhouettes in the fog. Inside, the riders stood in 2 lines near the entrance, their helmets arranged on a long service table beside the doors as their wet jackets carried the scent of rain, road dust, and cold metal into the perfumed room. Gravel offered Claire his arm while the other 99 riders formed a quiet procession behind them in staggered pairs. At the first notes of Gordon's chosen music, all 100 bikers began walking with her. Their boots moved at the same restrained pace, filling the aisle without surrounding or directing her. Gravel remained beside Claire, while every rider behind them crossed the full distance from the pavilion doors toward the altar. No one pretended to replace Gordon. Together, they made his absence visible without allowing it to become emptiness. Claire heard boots behind her, soft against the white carpet. She saw Daniel waiting beneath the floral arch, his tie still slightly crooked, his eyes fixed on her. Near the front row, Gordon's restored chair remained empty, his brown work jacket folded across its back. When Claire reached the final stretch, Gravel slowed beside her. He stopped at the point where Gordon would have released her arm. "Are you ready to walk the rest yourself?" he asked. Claire looked at the empty chair, then at Daniel. "Yes." Gravel stepped away. Daniel moved forward, not to claim her, but to meet her. Before the officiant began, he faced Claire and spoke clearly enough for the first rows to hear. "I should have stood beside you before you had to ask." Claire did not answer immediately. Behind her, 100 riders remained standing. In front of her, Daniel waited without reaching for her hand. At last, Claire extended it. The ceremony began while rain traced silver lines down the glass, and across the once perfect white carpet, a long path of dark, wet footprints remained. By 6:18 p.m., the rain had softened to a mist, but Marianne made one final attempt to reclaim the room. She approached the venue manager near the reception entrance, demanded that the riders be excluded from dinner, and insisted the pavilion issue a written statement describing their arrival as an unauthorized disruption. The manager placed the contract binder on the registration table, opened it to Section 14, and turned the amendment log toward her. The riders were authorized, he said. The unauthorized action was the removal of guests without the event holder's consent. Gravel stood 10 feet away with the other bikers, silent, helmets held at their sides, giving Marianne no anger to fight and no disorder to point toward. With the contract open and the riders still silent, Marianne had no rule left to bend. Her money had paid invoices, but it had not purchased Claire's voice, rewritten Gordon's invitation, or converted a blank authorization line into permission. Daniel stepped beside Claire and asked the manager to revoke Marianne's sponsor access for the remainder of the event. Claire added one condition: no public humiliation, no announcement, and no argument. Marianne could remain as a guest if she followed the same boundaries as everyone else. The choice left Marianne nowhere to hide. If she objected, she would confirm that control mattered more to her than family. If she stayed, she would do so without authority. She closed the silver folder and took her seat. Quietly, at the reception, Gordon's roadmap was displayed beside his photograph and restored chair. Riders approached it one at a time, touching a route number, reading an old note, or standing silently before the handwriting that had once brought them safely home. Claire understood that Gravel had placed every rider in the procession so all 100 could walk the full route with her without pretending that any one of them could replace Gordon. Together, they had fulfilled exactly what he could no longer do. They had walked his daughter from the pavilion doors to the man she had chosen, not as owners of her future, but as witnesses to the life her father had built around her. Before leaving, Gravel handed Claire a narrow brass road marker engraved only with Gordon's initials and the distance from the gate to the altar, 186 feet. Along the back were 100 fine notches, one for every biker who had crossed the full aisle with her. Your father measured dangerous roads, Gravel said. We measured this one for him. After the last motorcycle disappeared into the fog, a staff member asked whether Claire wanted the stained white aisle runner discarded. Wet boot prints marked its full length, dark and uneven against the fabric Marianne had chosen for its perfection. Claire asked them to preserve a 3-foot section carrying the clearest overlapping boot prints. 3 months later, that 3-foot section was mounted beneath Gordon's wax map in Claire and Daniel's home. The brass marker rested at the bottom of the frame. Daniel kept the promise he had made at the altar, setting firm boundaries with his mother and refusing to treat silence as neutrality again. Claire changed too. She stopped mistaking silence for peace. Whenever she looked at the frame footprints, she remembered that 100 road-worn men had waited outside a locked gate rather than take away her choice, while the people claiming to protect her had tried to make it for her. Gordon was still gone. The road he left behind was not. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.